Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I hope it's an auspicious one for all of us. Well, it looks like the channel is still here, and this was a worry for many people because of the new rules this platform released last month about, getting rid of commercially non-viable channels. So you don't even have to violate their terms of service now for them to nuke you, and a lot of people were thinking this was going to presage a huge purge, and maybe it does. Um, I just haven't been caught up in it yet. So, this is a valid concern because of something called Conquest's second law. And all of Conquest's laws are interesting, but the second one is probably the most interesting. And this law states that any organization which is not explicitly right wing will sooner or later become explicitly left wing. And you can see this all over the place, the Church of England, the International Olympic Committee, all these companies that collectively we call woke capitalism, Nike and Google and Apple and all these other companies. The tech companies perhaps more than most, because they are actually kind of epicentered around San Francisco, which is also the epicenter for everything gross and degenerate and leftist. So that area became ground zero for a lot of concurrent developments. Only one of which is the tech thing. But that's where it's centered, and that's where a lot of other things are centered in, so it's brought a lot of that pause with it. But this is a general phenomenon that affects all different kinds of organizations of all different types in all different kinds of places. And it might not immediately be obvious why it would be so, but let me make an analogy. Let me restate Conquest's second law in another form. Any garden that is not explicitly anti-weed will sooner or later be overrun by weeds. Right? Now that's obvious because evolution fills niches. Nature searches for opportunities to exploit, right? So if there's a patch of bare ground, some weed is going to grow up on it. And if there's an ounce of water or sunlight or nutrients to extract, some weed is going to try to do it. And so if you want to have a garden, which is like an orderly system that has some kind of purpose, that has some kind of product, and everything in its place working together to achieve that, if you want to have a garden, you have to ruthlessly suppress weeds. You have to tear them out by the roots. And you can't have a garden without doing that, because if you don't do that, sooner or later all you're going to have is a weed patch. And a civilization or an organization or really anything of that nature, anything with a purpose, anything with an order to it, anything with a system to it, is kind of like a garden. And leftists are weeds, and leftism is weedism. If weeds had an ideology, it would be leftist. So leftism is all about tearing down boundaries and bad-mouthing anything that has a purpose or a place, or denigrating or disparaging or discounting anything that has a purpose or a place, and then trying to take that place and not fulfill that purpose. That's what leftism is. Leftism is weedism. It's these human weeds that are growing up everywhere there's an opportunity, everywhere there's a space, everywhere where there's any kind of resource to extract, and choking out civilization itself. And that's what it is. And we have leftism because we don't weed our civilization's garden anymore. That's why we have leftism. It's cropped up in various times and places in the past. It's nothing new. There was the Albigensian Crusade in the 12th century against the Cathar heretics, who were advocating sodomy and gender equality and pacifism and vegetarian. That sounds very postmodern. That sounds very familiar. Are you sure this was the 12th century? Yes, this was the 12th century. So this stuff is nothing new. It crops up whenever you don't suppress it. And in that case, they suppressed it rather forcefully. And we still have the expression, kill them all, let God sort them out as a result. That's where that comes from. So that's where that originates. And it's a slight variation on the original quote, which was, kill them all, God will know his own. But variations on that theme have persisted to this very day. It happened again in the 16th century with things like the Anabaptists, the radical Protestants. During the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church finally lost its handle on heresy. Heresy got out of control. So that cat's out of the bag. But the most radical Protestants, perhaps, were like the Anabaptists. And their idea was to resurrect something like, primitive Christianity. And their interpretation of that was that it involved the abolition of private property and monogamous marriage. That sounds pretty familiar. That sounds pretty modern. Postmodern, rather. Are you sure this was the 16th century? Yes, it was. And if you look up the Munster Rebellion, they actually took over the city of Munster for a while in Germany, and it was, pretty short-lived when I think it was the Catholic forces showed up to put down the rebellion. The defenders of the city, the new Anabaptist rulers, were already so weakened from plague and starvation that they were no resistance whatsoever, hardly any. And they hung the leaders of that rebellion from the spire of the cathedral in cages, and those cages are still hanging there today. So that's how you deal with this sort of thing, and it's nothing new. These weeds pop up where they pop up whenever there's an opportunity, and you either weed the garden and you maintain civilization, or you maintain functional organizations and functional institutions, or you don't and the weeds take over. And we haven't, and so the weeds have taken over. And that's why this is true of any organization, not just big tech, although it's perhaps most true of big tech. And it's even true now of open source communities and open source software, where they have these like codes of conduct, which are basically a blank check for grotesque perverts and degenerate freaks to thought police and tone police everybody in these projects. So not even open source is immune. And, weak-kneed centrists and libertarians who think that they can stand on some kind of principle of neutrality or impartiality are deluding themselves, because if you don't have a mechanism for weeding your garden, it'll just become a weed patch. And whatever your garden happens to be, whether it's a company, a firm, or an open source project, or a civilization, if it's not weeded on a regular basis, it's going to become overrun with weeds. And that's what leftists are. They're weeds. And leftism is weedism. It's the ideology of weeds. The ideology of attacking anything that has a purpose and a place and an order and a system to it, and trying to undermine it and break down those barriers and just open up the buffet for parasites and weeds.